Welcome, and thank you for joining today's Innovation Ecosystem Creativity event. We're delighted you could join us. And before we get started, I want to thank our partners at IP Watchdog for their support and help with today's event. My name's Frank Cullen. I'm with the Global Innovation Policy Center at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And some folks may wonder why the U.S. Chamber of Commerce cares about the creative industry sectors and the issues that help make that industry sector successful. Well, I can tell you that the creative industries are a huge economic force and job creator, and they also bring so much pleasure and benefits to our society at large. So we're delighted to have an opportunity today to be joined by a really excellent panel of speakers to cover some of the topics that we think might really help you better understand how the creative industry sectors work, and also what we need to do to continue to support them. It's also my pleasure today to welcome and introduce the Vice Chairman of the Global Innovation Policy Center at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, my friend Danny Marty. Danny is the head of Global Government Affairs at RELX. He's also Vice Chairman, as I said, of the Global Innovation Policy Center, and he's well known as an expert on a wide range of IP issues. Prior to joining RELX and becoming Vice Chairman of GIPC, Danny served in the White House as the Intellectual Property Enforcement Coordinator for the U.S. government, a tremendously important role that allowed him to help coordinate across all federal government agencies and departments, IP enforcement and IP policy. So he played a critically important leadership role in the Obama administration and continues to play an important role in his current position at RELX and at the GIPC. I'm also delighted to let you know that Danny, prior to having the other roles I mentioned, had a long, successful career in the private practice as an attorney specializing in IP. So without further ado, it's my real pleasure to welcome Danny Marty and also to thank all our panelists for taking the time to join us today. Danny?
Thank you, Frank. I'm Danny Marty, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the U.S. Chamber's Innovation Ecosystem Conference, a series of events focused on the special conditions and investments that give rise to and support innovation, creativity, and craftsmanship in the U.S. and global economies. Today, we will be holding the series Creative Community Breakout Session. I'm honored to moderate today's session, a session where I want us to collectively focus on the how. How are our creative ecosystems stood up? How do the creative sectors invest in people and business models to advance art, culture, and commerce? I want to know, how are these sectors nurtured and supported? And for that matter, how and when do they thrive? And how and when do these ecosystems become undermined or threatened? As a broader community of policy experts, lawyers, business executives, and government officials, we at times, and perhaps too often, speed past really understanding the inputs that give rise to a creative and innovative ecosystem. And therefore, we sometimes find ourselves inadvertently talking mainly about outputs, that is the end product and the intellectual property rights that exist, for example, in the recorded song or the movie or the video game and the like. Focusing on outputs is important, to be clear, they're part of the process. But today, I want us to kick off our discussion focused more on the inputs, the ingredients that go into our creative ecosystems. A solid understanding of these ecosystems is important to our society, our economy, and to our own personal well-being. Why? Well, as you heard Frank mention, our creatives and creative industries are critical to our economic and cultural lives, supporting millions of jobs, boosting exports, and incentivizing all forms of dynamic and enriching creative expression. Today, we'll hear from our panelists precisely how our creative communities contribute to society and how society experiences creativity. I have three distinguished leaders from the film, television, music, and interactive entertainment industries with me today. And we'll invite them to share with us in greater detail a few opening remarks about how their respective sectors work and how these businesses, ranging everything from small or startup to independent to large, contribute to the broader creative ecosystem. Our first panelist is Ruth Vitale, Chief Executive Officer of CreativeFuture. Ruth has been at the forefront of independent film production and distribution throughout her storied career, including as founder and co-president of Paramount Classics. Her films have won 3 Oscars and received 16 nominations, as well as 18 Golden Globe nominations and 2 wins. Ruth's organization, CreativeFuture, is a coalition of more than 500 companies and organizations and over 275 creative individuals encompassing everything from film, television, music, photography, and book publishing. Ruth, thank you for joining us today. Ruth, tell me, how did you start your career in film, and what exactly goes into the film and TV ecosystem? Right, from the outside, we see the shiny finished product, but I must admit, we don't always get an upfront view of what the entire enterprise actually entails.
Yeah. Thank you, Danny, first for having us, and thank you, GIPC and Frank. It's a pleasure to be here. After 30 years of producing and distributing films, I stepped away from day-to-day work to do what I'm doing now. But in answer to your question of how did I start, I started like everybody else did, working a desk, okay? Because in our business, you start at the beginning, okay? Either as a production assistant, which means you work on a movie set or a television set, or you work a desk for an executive or at an agency, and you learn the ropes. It is a tough business. And when I hear people say, oh, it's just entertainment, you're right. You have no idea of the time and effort. I often say this. I know that no one thinks that we shoot these movies and television shows in the backyard on a flip phone in an afternoon. Okay. Whether it's that or making a song, you know, an album, I've seen the village that it takes to make a movie or a television show, and the years of work that it often takes even before the cameras start rolling. So let's start with the film and television industry alone employs 2.5 million Americans. All right, that's a substantial number. And of the 93,000 businesses that make up our industry, 87% of them are small businesses that employ fewer than 10 people. So when a lot of people think about entertainment and they think, oh, it's just big behemoths, it's the studios, it's, you know, the record labels. That's not it. It's like we employ millions of individuals, okay? And according to the MPA, the film and television industry pays out more than $180 billion in total wages every year. Okay, so, but the thing is, when you see a product, finally, a movie or a television show, it can be years in the making. One of the movies that we brought to Capitol Hill for a Creative Rights Caucus event was Spotlight. So Spotlight was a journalistic endeavor by the Boston Globe, my hometown, in 2000. Took them a couple of years to do that story. I think $1 million, Ben Bradley, the editor, said, Ben Bradley Jr. And Nicole Rockland, one of the producers, optioned the rights to the stories in 2008. The movie never came out until 2015. From 2008 to 2015, as she was walking around with this story, for those 7 years, she didn't make any money. Okay, they put pieces together, they got actors involved, they got a little money to write a screenplay, and then it took 7 years to get that movie made. And while those people are working, trying to put the movie together, they're not making money on that project. So when people just say, oh, it's so easy, it's not easy. There are, that's famous saying, it's like, oh, an overnight sensation. Yeah, 30 years in the making or 10 years in the making, whatever it happens to be. Our business is difficult. It takes so many people, and also it's one of the original gig economies. These are people that come together to make a movie or a television show, okay? 60, 70 core people, the crew, the production crew, and they work on this movie together, and then they go away. okay? And then they come together on another one. But when I hear that, oh, the gig economy was invented by other industries, yeah, no, we're pretty much at the beginning of it because we've been around 100 years and that's how it's always worked. I often joke that I don't understand how we haven't gotten further so we can just push a button. But no, every time you make a movie or a television show, right, you have to put all these people together. And, you know, at the end of movies, there's all those credits. I often think, do people think that those are imaginary people? Those are actually people that worked 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, especially on animated movies and special effects movies. There's thousands of people that work on these films. So I just want to impress upon our audience that it doesn't happen overnight. And it employs so many people. I'll give you one example that we always talk about with the Creative Rights Caucus. Gallant is the executive producer of The Walking Dead and all the other Walking Dead, spinoffs. When they went to shoot in Sonoy, Georgia, the town was almost dying. There were six businesses on Main Street, all in sort of various forms of, going out of business. With The Walking Dead there for 11 seasons, that town has become a booming, thriving city. And even when the show ends from season 11, there will be people there who will come because it's now a tourist industry, because they're going to want to see where The Walking Dead was filmed. The other thing that's interesting about our business is that when we go to a city or a town, any location, we leave close to $200,000 a day into the local economy, not for the movie itself, but for hotels, restaurants, bars, dry cleaners, gasoline, everything. We bring people and we bring industry. So we matter.
Thank you, Ruth. Pre-pandemic, when I took the kids to the movies, we would sit to watch the credits. I think they always thought I was a little crazy to do so, but I wanted them to see just really what goes into a movie. But from hearing you, that's still kind of the tip of the iceberg. Those are the people who, of course, work the film, but perhaps doesn't fully capture that labor of love that you mentioned over a decade or so to make it happen.
And what it also doesn't include, because, okay, so you get your production crew together, you get your writers who work on this for years, perhaps, in most cases, years. What it doesn't, after the movie is finished, but before it's finished, you have an entire distribution, marketing, and publicity team working on the film to position it so that it breaks through the clutter of your consciousness as a consumer, as an audience member, okay?
Right.
Long before the movie is ever done, you start to hear things, okay? Pieces are placed so that it's employing, listen, the core copyright industries, we've talked about this, the International Intellectual Property Alliance does a study every 2 years, and the one in December 2020 talked about the 2019 numbers. The core copyright industries, which are film and TV and music and journalism and gaming, employs 5.7 million people in America, accounting for 3.79% of the entire workforce. So again, just don't think about it as the people that make the album or the people at the concert hall.
The entire support network around.
Huge support network.
Yeah.
And let me just add, I'm enamored by the credits because I've watched WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Yeah.
And all those people around the world who are employed making those shows is phenomenal. And I'm a big DC and Marvel fan, so I'm more than happy to see all the people who take part in that endeavor.
I'm glad it's only me and you at the end of a movie apparently in the theater. Well, thank you, Ruth. We'll of course come back to a panel discussion around some of the points you talked about. Let me introduce our second panelist, Bart Herbison, the executive director of the Nashville Songwriters Association International. A Tennessee native, Bart has worked as a reporter and a disc jockey in radio before turning to politics. Bart worked in both Nashville and Washington, D.C., where he served as Deputy Director of Communications for then Governor McWhorter, and U.S. Representative Bob Clement, where he was Press Secretary and Campaign Manager. Bart left Capitol Hill for Music Row in the late 1990s. Bart, I'm delighted that you could join us today and share some of what goes into the songwriting profession. Your association, I understand, is the world's largest not-for-profit songwriters trade organization dedicated to the profession. And I appreciate that your association serves everyone from aspiring to professional songwriters across all genres of music. Bart, growing up in Nashville, I would assume it's hard not to have music coursing through your veins, but tell us a little how you first got involved in this creative community, and would love to learn a little bit more about the range of issues that go into supporting songwriters.
Well, I actually grew up in Paris, where my father was a painter. Paris, Tennessee, and he was a house painter. And so look, I have always been obsessed with music. Everybody in my family was creative except for me. So from my first job as a DJ at age 16 to following the bands, to even when I worked in my government positions, I always carved out the music roles. And I was always drawn to the words, to the lyrics, to the songs, to the songwriters. So a little quick story, I worked for the US Congressman from Nashville for 10 years. His name was Bob Clement. And my very first week there, that was part of the deal. Typically, I was the press secretary. I didn't do issue-based work, but I said, I'm doing the music issues. And he said, we've got somebody else to do that. And I said, I'm probably not the guy. So we acquiesced, let me do it. And I'd literally been up there days when the Nashville Songwriters Association International came to see me about some important music issue. And they must have hated the meeting because all I did was like, you do what? You guys do what? There's a group for songwriters. And I will also say I grew up with a guy from Paris that became a famous songwriter. So that was always where I wanted my dart to land. I said that day I said, that will be my life's work. That will be my next job.
Impressive.
10 years later it was, and I've been doing it for 25 years. So, you know, it's common with a lot of what Ruth said. And by the way, so impressed by everything you've done, Ruth, and you too,
Oh,
Dan.
thank
And
you.
I want to thank Danny and Frank for having us today. But songwriters are dreamers. So you're that weirdo in your hometown. Typically, you get picked on. The Taylor Swift story is true. That's that songwriter person, you know. And at some point, you decide you're going to leave that town and go to one of the music centers. You know, when I started this job, there were 10 or 15 places with publishing companies and record labels. We're really down to a couple now, where the major industry lives. But you go tell your family and there's an intervention. You're going to go do what? You're going to go write songs? Is that even a thing? And especially the ones that want to just be songwriters and aren't artists. And so you take a big leap of faith. You come to a town like Nashville and you realize that you are ill-equipped. You don't know anything about the industry. And the people, even your colleagues who are just a year or two ahead of you, trying to find a professional spot, are way better than you are. And it's a math exercise. I don't have any statistical manual to go by, but my observation from 25 years is out of every 1,000 songwriters that make a life commitment and move to Nashville for that purpose, something happens good for one out of 1,000. And out of those, a second big song happens to about 1%. It's hard, it's difficult. There will be more new starters next season for the Tennessee Titans than new songwriters with hit songs. It takes years to learn your craft. And so you come to town and most people stop. Life takes over, you decide to have a family, parents intercede for whatever reason, you quit doing it. But a few persevere. And one day they hear their song on the radio. And I think everyone will tell you that even though they've starved to death and sometimes, you know, not taken the typical family life path, that one song was worth it. And then the new kids come to town. J.D. Souther wrote that for the Eagles about this very thing. They're all out there starting to have hits, and here come the new kids, and music changes. And it's hard and hard and harder to sustain a career in this. I will also point out, as I end this part, that I think most of your audience understands there are two very distinct copyrights when it comes to music. There's the song you write, the musical work or the underlying work it's called. Then there's the record that you or somebody else makes of that song under two completely different set of rules. And for the past century, songwriters have been under, and still are to some degree, oppressive government regulation. The government sets our rates, while our colleagues on the record label side, that sound recording, for the most part, until recent times, they get to negotiate those rates in a free market. Whether we like those rates or not, we're under something called a compulsory license. We are compelled by law to let you use that song once we let the first person use it. And it hasn't served us well, especially in the digital era. And we've seen from my window, I've seen 4,000 songwriters 20 years ago with publishing deals go down to 400. Now it's rebounded. My guesstimates were somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 now, but there's less opportunity. Most of those songwriters, Danny, made a living on album cuts, and nobody buys albums anymore. You got to have a single, and the single's got to get on the radio to do well. Another thing we've seen is more and more of the songwriters are also wearing the artist hat for no other reason than pure economics. But we've passed the Music Modernization Act. We're in the middle of a copyright royalty board proceeding where I think we're going to do well. So there is more optimism for the future, but it's a tough, tough road, and you better be a dreamer and you better have pretty thick skin.
Well, thank you, Bart. I always knew it was a difficult career, but really just hearing it's quite daunting. And those that are able to make it through support of people like you and other groups and families and friends and kind of all of our communities, it really is inspiring on what they're able to accomplish.
One little factoid is when I took this job, we had 42 record companies in Nashville. Today we have 5.
Yeah.
So it's really changed in the digital era.
You know,
there's just fewer opportunities.
The issue is that people never believe that, you know, the industries are diminishing in many ways, right? That, like, let's bring it back to piracy, the digital piracy, that it doesn't hurt, because music never stopped being made. But I think what audiences don't understand is most of those people are either living in their parents' basement or barely making ends meet. And the only way that you can actually make a living is if you're on tour. And you're right, Bart, no one's buying albums. You know, that's.
Well, we did an event before the Music Modernization Act, along with the National Music Publishers Association, and NSAI. You may not know the songwriters, but we had 5 songwriters play one famous song. You're Gonna Miss This, Living on a Prayer, Beautiful. And we never spoke a word. Our entire press conference was this. Each of these songs had a co-writer and each had publishers involved, which means the songwriter got 25% of the royalties. For 35 million streams on Spotify, they each earned $185. The rest are case. It's better now, but it's not where it needs to be to sustain careers, especially for that writer that's not the artist. We're talking Hoagie Carmichael, we're talking Jimmy Webb, we're talking Steve Bogart, we're talking Hillary Lindsay. Those have been the biggest victims of songwriting in the digital era, those who just want to write songs for others.
What attracted me to this policy space, it's not, you know, quote unquote, just about the music or film or video or books. It really is that creative spark that exists in our neighbors, our families, our communities, that allow a lot of things to happen. Can you imagine a world without this type of creativity, without the dreamers, Bart, that you mentioned? You know, it is a less rich environment for us, and it's something we really need to do better to support. Let me formally introduce our third and final panelist, Ben Gallant. Ben is the Chief Counsel for Intellectual Property at the Entertainment Software Association in Washington, D.C. Before joining ESA, Ben had a distinguished career working in senior roles at the Federal Communications Commission, the U.S. Copyright Office, and the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. We're fortunate to have Ben with us today, not only as an expert on copyright and technology, but also as a representative of the Entertainment Software Association. ESA's members serve as the innovators, creators, publishers, and business leaders that are working to reimagine entertainment and transforming how we interact, learn, connect, and play. Ben, welcome, and thank you for joining us. Ben, you've heard some from Ruth and Bart, and I'm hoping you could share with us how your industry, the video game industry, intersects, if at all, with film and music or other creative sectors.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me today. I'm always happy to help out the chamber however I can. And
thank you
to Bart and Ruth to take part in this. I'm honored to be in their presence because I'm just part of the industry here. And I get chills hearing about movies and music and all the creativity there. So we in the video game industry see copyright as a creative economic engine. And in this particular case, we see it as a unifying force. We have a symbiotic relationship between music and movies. And as you probably well might know, video games are a key source for adaptations. And if this was a longer presentation in real live halls, I would have had a PowerPoint and had it big on the board, and you can all see this, but I'll go quickly. I miss those days. They'll come soon, I hope.
Soon.
So let's put it this way. So video games and music is one of the items on the agenda. So we have an enormous amount of creativity. There are composers who are now going to video game studios and saying, I want to write that score. I want to do that soundtrack, because they see this audience of newer up and coming fans that both play and also have headphones, as everybody else has, and listen to music as they play. And so you can also see this as an example at Wolf Trap. They have Video Games Live, right? Where they have the scores from major games like The Legend of Zelda, and they have millions of fans, both online and offline, listening. Then you have music from Final Fantasy and among many other games that we know of very well. And then on the flip side, we have like soundtracks from Pokemon, the first movie, which peaked at number 8 on the Billboard Top 100 back 20 years ago. And then independent studios and smaller game companies, and there are many of those, release soundtracks along with their games because people know that they love to hear what the composers have done with that particular kind of music. And then along with many games, at least in the physical space, you could also get the soundtrack as a CD back in the day that comes along with the game. So the music industry is part and parcel now. There are, in fact, different stations on Spotify that are devoted to video game music. There are a whole host of different video game composer groups out there. And you can just imagine that the creativity of video games and music will continue on. In terms of video games and movies, there's a great story to tell there. For example, there have been adaptations of the World of Warcraft, Detective Pikachu, Rampage, Angry Birds, Sonic the Hedgehog just last year. All of these movies made over $300 million at the box office and continue to do so online. So these movies, as Ruth had aptly said, employ thousands of people with good high-paying jobs, and having video games as the font, as that source for adaptation, will continue. And in that vein, we have more and more video games seen online. For example, Resident Evil will be a TV series on Netflix. Assassin's Creed will be a TV series on Netflix. The Last of Us will be a TV series on HBO Max. There's already a Castlevania show on Netflix, and EA is producing TV shows to broaden the video game market. And here's some for the old timers, including myself. There'll be a Frogger video game TV show coming out very, very soon. So you can see that the symbiosis will continue. And that's not even including some of the other things that licensing has empowered. And I can get into it later, but video games in fashion, video games in hospitality, video games in theme parks. For example, Universal Studios in Japan just opened up Super Nintendo World, which I just can't wait to go. Because that's
Same here.
that's gonna be the most amazing thing ever. And as a big fanboy of Nintendo and Universal, it's going to be something that I'll remember forever. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Danny to ask
No,
more
thank
questions.
thank you, Ben. You know, you guys have touched upon some of the depth and breadth behind your industries, but let's talk a little bit more about the range of people and jobs that are involved to actually bring a film or a song or a game to market. What type of jobs are supported in your sectors? Are they the same? Is there some overlap? Are they different depending on the entertainment sector? Ruth, would you mind starting us off?
No, sure. So there is some overlap. I would think one of the things I always say is that you can have music by itself, but you cannot tell stories, film or television, and I would think probably video games, but Ben can speak to that, without music. It would be, think about, I don't, sometimes, you're not even aware of listening to like score, underscore. If a score is done right on a film or a television show, it's part of the fabric and it should lift, but it shouldn't be like in your face unless there's certain points where, they want to build up tension. So there's certainly overlap, but in the film and television business, the jobs range like a community, like a village. Okay. There's the production design team. They're responsible for the look of everything that you see. Photos, desk, television monitor, like whatever you see in a shot is part of the production team. Okay. Costume. They're responsible for everything that you wear on your body. Okay. And they have to have, multiple outfits if you're being blown up or killed or whatever. So there's an entire team of people who are in the costume design. There's a cinematographer and his team who shoot the movie and all the electrical people with him. There's hair and makeup. Okay. Because every morning your cast has to come in and they have to do hair and makeup. I remember that when we were doing The Mask, the Jim Carrey at New Line, it was 3 hours of makeup for Jim every morning. So before he starts shooting, you're sitting in a chair getting your makeup done. Okay. And your hair. Transportation, bringing back and forth. There's a script coordinator at making sure that you have your glass in the same place after the second take. It is literally
wow.
and in the production design team, it's all the construction. I've often wondered why it takes so long to build a house when you can like build a house in a movie for, in a week. Okay. I think we should start figuring out why that takes less time, but there are hundreds of job skills in the film. And then the editor and his team, who after the movie is shot and there's hundreds of hours of footage, to give you an idea, for 1 hour of television, there's usually 40 hours of footage that the editor has to go through. So he and the editor and his team have to go through everything and figure out how best and what takes to tell the story. Meaning a take is, we could do my angle straight on, or we could do my angle like this way. There could be a close-up, there could be a long shot. So all of that is put together seamlessly, and it should be seamless to an audience member. Like if you see an odd cut, that means the editor didn't do a good job, frankly. And then there's the composer, okay? And the composer who works with the filmmaker and the editor to figure out where score is needed. And then there's a music supervisor in their team who decides where where real songs come in. Have I forgotten anybody?
Yeah, let me just add to that. I want to say that the video game industry is cut from the same cloth as the film industry. In fact, if you think about Pixar and what our members do and what video game companies do, it's pretty much almost on the same line, except one is interactive and one is more passive. And so in the industry, writers and producers are key for the big immersive interactive entertainment that we know of. The software developers, audio engineers, animators, storyboard artists, voice actors, and composers. Those are the key jobs in all the video game companies.
And you think about sound effects, okay? Like there's it's like, and I think I forgot the screenwriters. And by the way, they're usually, one of them is always, on set, because if they have to change something or something doesn't make sense, so they don't just write the script and walk away. Generally.
So how do you fund this? You have so many layers of people, plus the people behind the people. and at location, et cetera. How do you fund something like this to make it work?
So there's two ways that film and television get financed. They either get financed through the motion picture studios and their television companies, or in the independent sector, they're done through international pre-sales, which means you sell territories. So I'll say to France, hey, I'm going to make this movie and I'm not going through a studio. Can you give me X percentage of the budget so that I can bank that? And they do that around the world, all the major territories, the Far East, Japan, the UK, Germany, France, South America. And they put that financing together piece by piece. Okay. And that happens a lot. So according to IFTA, actually, Independent Film and Television Alliance, US independent production companies shot 501 feature films in 2019. And those were put together by piecemealing in, stuff. So when you do that contract, by the way, they don't give you the money until you deliver the finished film or the finished television show. So you have to go to a bank it, and you're going to have to get gap financing, okay, to cover the discounted on the contracts. So the 501 feature films that were independent films in 2019 resulted in over 35,000 full-time jobs directly related to the productions themselves, and another 107,000 full-time jobs for the various vendors that service the film industry. And both classes of those employees earned over $14.95 billion in 2019. Now, I can hear people saying, well, then we shouldn't feel sorry for them. But these are working jobs. These are skilled labor. Okay. These are people that just want to put food on their table, send their kids to school, and make a decent living.
That's what I've learned. It's not about the headline actor, the famous director. It's about the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people that go into supporting this. We have a few minutes. Let me keep us kind of moving along and kind of bring up the pandemic. On the one hand, we know that many have suffered along with so many in our communities as live music venues went quiet, theaters and stages went dark. But on the other hand, am I wrong to think that maybe these dark and quiet venues have reawakened some strong cultural appetites and understanding of the role that the creatives play in our society?
I don't really, I'd have to think about that. I don't see the A to B connection, Danny. We own a music venue. NSAI owns the Bluebird Cafe that's now closed for going on 13 months. We've done a few things from out of there, but that's a pretty deep logic chain. Songwriters are worried about opportunities, and they really slowed down during this. Record labels make some money on records now digitally, but on most of them, they lose money. They are recording songs so people can go tour, and they can share in the touring revenue and the merchandise and all that. And without tours, it really slowed down. There were less cuts, there were less singles, there were less opportunities for the songwriters. And I'll just say one more thing, Ruth, before we segue. I was going to
say, you're right. The only way your guys make money is on tour.
Yeah, and the songwriters, the only way they make it is from royalties. Right. And so on your previous question about paying, the songwriter pays 100% up to a point. They pay for their instruments, they pay for the demos. You finally get a publishing deal and you get a draw, which is a loan against your own future royalties that you are paying. Maybe you get a little bit of a demo budget, but it's all going out till 18 months later. Hopefully something comes in. It's a tough prospect. The pandemic did, I think, for songwriters, some love Zoom, some they hate Zoom, but I can tell you to a person, most are glad that they're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. It's a different experience to try to write together real time versus being in a room in real time versus doing it on Zoom.
I will say that copyright is the only thing that stands between our industries and the breadline, our communities. Right? Without copyright protections, we have no way, our creative communities have no way of making any money. The pandemic has unfortunately made it worse because for a long time, everything was shut down and music venues still are. But for the film and television business, piracy increased. Now, in many ways, I understand that. People were out of work, they were stuck at home, they couldn't afford to. Be that as it may, it hurt a lot of people. I think over 300,000 people are out of work in the LA community alone. And the Chamber has a study which from 2019 that estimated that piracy siphons at least $29.2 billion and as much as $70 billion from the economy, and between 230 and 560,000 jobs every year. That's only gotten worse.
So anything that works to undermine those types of investments just make what is a difficult life, a difficult career, doubly difficult. I'll share with you the former chairman of the NEA under George W. Bush and a former California poet laureate, Dana Goya, had shared with me a few years ago, and it really resonated with me. He said, to be creative and productive, a society must respect the dignity of labor. Whether people work with their hands or their minds, they deserve to benefit from the fruits of their own labor. And his point here is no one would question whether it would be acceptable to steal somebody's desk or car or horse. But yet when we talk about something that is intellectual, a concept, a song, a movie, a video game, suddenly there perhaps is higher tolerance for eroding the investments, the time, the money, the energy, the love that goes into producing these. So it's important that we understand the value of these works.
Not to sound like a horrible old lady, but I do believe that technology has made it easier for people to rationalize stealing things. When I hear my 96-year-old uncle say, here's a song, and it's like I stole it off of YouTube. I was like, you do know what I do, right, Uncle Pat? And he was like, yeah. I said, so would you go into a store and steal something? And he said, well, if it was as easy as this is, I would. And that's a problem. With the ease with which people can steal an intellectual property, they don't actually think of it as having any value. And I guess today what we're trying to say to people is we employ millions of people.
I'll add this, and then I do have to go.
No.
There's a song involved. They're going to play a song at your funeral. There will be a song played at your wedding. There's probably a song involved in your conception. Let's remember the value of music. Our trademark, we actually own a trademark. It's our theme. It all begins with the song. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Bart.
Right. Thank you, Bart.
One last question, and then we'll wrap it up. And Ruth, I want to build on what you just touched upon, but maybe take it in a slightly different direction. Around technology, as far as I can remember, there's been some public narrative that seemed to put kind of technology, American technology in one camp and the creative sector in another. And I must admit, this has always bothered me on a few levels as being fundamentally untrue. Ben, I heard you talk about how the video game industry is really kind of transforming creative new technologies that's infusing into movies. Share with me some of your thoughts around the what I would see as a blurred line between what we do in the creative sector and kind of the broader technology narrative.
Well, I would be happy. Ruth, I'm going to go and answer that first.
Oh, well, no, you go ahead, and because I keep talking, so talk. Because I don't really know games, which, by the way, if I ever got into gaming, I think you'd have to come and put intravenous in me, because I find it. I know that it would be such a time suck and so much fun.
Do you have a mobile device, right? You have an iPhone or?
Yes, I do. And when I get on my game thing, it's like I could get hit by a truck walking across the street. So I like.
Well, so no, it's our view that there really is no line between tech and creative, because the video game industry does everything and more. So, for example, as you heard, we create games, we publish games, but we also invent devices, whether it be the latest PlayStation 5 or the Xbox Series X. it's all one big happy family of how things go hand in glove. You need the new device to play the new games. You have a mobile device to play mobile games. You have a new PC to play PC games. And so the lines there, if there ever were any, are completely blurred now. And so
Well,
patents and copyrights go together,
yeah.
trademarks on top of that, trade secrets are below that. And so
But
it's
you know,
one big
what
thing.
we always hear is that our industry, at least I hear in film and TV, you probably don't hear this in gaming, is that we're Luddites, we don't appreciate technology. And that's when, as Danny knows, I get berserk. Because here's the thing. Look at Avatar. Look at all the different technologies that we have developed, our industry has developed or embraced to tell stories in a more sophisticated and real life 3D way. So don't tell us that we're Luddites. Don't tell us that we don't embrace technology. The things that you see on screen, you wouldn't see without our embracing of technology and inventing some of it.
Right. I was going to add that I read MPA's latest submission to the Patent and Trademark Office from last couple of months ago, and it was incredibly informative. 15 pages of how innovation and invention go into making a movie and how it all needs to be protected. So yeah, I know this, but we have to tell the world all about it too.
I think that when we do our jobs really well, whether it's in gaming or film or television and music, you don't see the seams. You don't see the infrastructure that put it together. You don't see how, because I do, I'll be like, wow, that was a weird choice for like where they put the camera. Oh, that was weird how they lit it. I wonder if that's on purpose. It's like, oh, that's an interesting costume. All of that, you should never pay attention to. It's only in service to the story that we're trying to serve up to audiences.
Well, thank you both. You've both been wonderful storytellers, and thank you for sharing your personal stories and your industry story with us, and to our audience for joining. With that, let me hand it over, Tyler.
Thank you so much, Danny. Hello, my name is Tyler Crow, and on behalf of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Global Innovation Policy Center, I would like to thank all of our guests for joining us today for the Innovation Ecosystem series entitled A Creative Community. I hope that today's event and panel helped to shed light not just on the films, television shows, streaming series, songs, and video games that we love, but to truly learn about the hard work and heart that goes into making them possible. I'd like to thank our panel today, Danny, Ben, Ruth, and Bart, for sharing your lived experience in these really fascinating industries. And I would also like to thank our media partner for the Innovation Ecosystem series, IP Watchdog. I would also like to cordially invite everybody here to the next installment of our Innovation Ecosystem series, which will be taking place on Tuesday, April 20th at 3 p.m., entitled A Healthy Ecosystem, and on April 28th, the final capstone piece of this series entitled The Common Thread. I hope that you all enjoyed today's panel, and thank you so much again for joining us. We look forward to being in touch. Have a great day.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.